Greetings and welcome to my channel. This is Sorcerer Tal. You can also find me on Facebook in the Sorcerers Guild. Today on Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 2, we are going to be talking about what actually happens when you die, the mechanics of the death and dying process, and what it is that you leave behind. Okay, so this video is connected to the essay Naturally Occurring Hauntings, but I felt it was important that we go over the mechanics of what happens during the death process and what it is that you leave behind so that you can more aptly understand what it is that causes these naturally occurring hauntings to occur. Okay, so there will be a link to a Google Docs copy of this essay in the description portion of the post. It is the same essay as last video though, but there will also be a link to where you can purchase a copy of the Sorcerer's Shadow Volume 2 on Amazon, should you so choose. Now, any videos on death, I do like to say that anyone who claims they know what happens after we die is either lying or trying to sell you something. Now, while I am trying to sell you a book, I am not intentionally lying to you. There's lots of people that are completely convinced that they know what is going to happen after we die, and they will very strongly go out of their way to convince you that they know as well. And, well, my own belief of what happens when we die comes from personal experience. I died once as a child. When I was 8 years old, I OD'd on anesthesia and had a near-death experience. But also, I have a lot of past life memory. And one of the first things I remember of almost every life is dying and what happened immediately after, before the rest of the memories flood back to me from death forward, or backwards, to the beginning of that life. However you want to phrase that. Anyways, so, in my own personal experience and memory, I have died many times. And then you add to that the fact that my necromancy, well, it gets results, and it's based on the knowledge that I gained from these experiences. So as they say, let results be your guide. And so I do feel pretty well qualified to say that I know what happens after we die. This, however, does not make me a prophet or a guru. I just happen to know a bit about this because, well, I've done it many times. Okay, so what happens when we die? It's a lot like falling asleep. And depending on how you die, it will be a little bit different. Now, we exist in 3 realms at all times, whether we are alive or dead, awake or asleep. And as I've said many times, this is the astral realm, the mental plane, and the material realm. And ideally, we should be attuned to the very center of that triangle. If you were to picture it as 3 points on a triangle, ideally we should be attuned to the center. But most of the time, when we are awake and alive, our mind and our perceptions are focused primarily on a combination of the material and the mental realms. What it is we are doing and experiencing around us and our thoughts about that. And then when we go to sleep, it reverses. One eye closes and another opens. And we begin being focused primarily on the astral and the mental realm, a combination of those somewhere over that way. So it's like turning from one way to the other. And it's the same thing when we die. We begin to focus primarily on the astral and mental realms. But we tend to lose we lose the perception that we had as we turn away. And this is where a lot of the loss of memory comes in, is during this process, because the old is stripped away to make way for the new. And so only those things that resonated with us most deeply come with us and affect what we perceive and therefore weave after and during our death. Now, when I died from the anesthesia as a child, I was under the anesthesia, and then I found myself in the undefined, or the nothing, that which is not yet. And when you're there, whatever you perceive is going to weave. And I had the instinctual knowledge from what resonates with me and what has become cohesive enough to know that anything I considered or thought of in that moment was going to start weaving. and I knew to pull away from that and come back towards life. Now, that's what's going to happen if you die while you're asleep in between dreams. You're going to wind up in that space, and then whatever you perceive begins to weave, and that will uh, begin your entrance into the astral realm until you enter into the fuller astral realm, and then you'll begin interacting with the entire realm. And it depends on where you wind up on the astral plane as to how that's going to go. So it's important to be prepared for these things in several ways, which I have a lot of videos on that. That's not really today's video. This is more simply about what happens. Okay, so if you die unexpectedly, you can find yourself there as well. Just all of a sudden, you're going along and then boom, you're in the undefined and you start perceiving. And it's like going into a dream. It's like the very beginning of a dream. That part just before you start remembering what you dreamed. I know it's hard to understand that. I just said you don't remember it, but there's that bit. You can kind of feel what I mean if you really think about it, just before the dream starts. Now, if you were fading in and out, if you were slowly dying, you're going to move into that realm over and over again, kind of ease your way in, kind of like when you're nodding off to sleep. And when people are in this state, they cross over and can actually see the dead, even while they are technically still alive sometimes. That's why sometimes you'll have dead people you'll have people that are on death's door talking to dead people that are, like they say, are standing right there. It's because they're in between and they have drawn the attention of those that cared about them enough that that is one of the things that stayed with them when they turned away from this perception into the other. They remembered them, and when they begin fading in and out and slow starting to appear on that other side, the dead can then come and greet them, and they notice them, because they're kind of blinking essentially. Now, if you die quickly, this is a pretty short process, but there's still going to be that fade out, very much like falling asleep, like just going under and falling asleep, and the dream reality will slowly eat away at the old perception until it creates the new weave, which will be created from what was before, but is now something completely different. As I said, when one eye closes, another opens, but it is still the same perception that is behind both eyes. So one affects the other. Some stuff stays, and some stuff goes, and that's where we get into the personal sigils and controlling what stays and what goes and where we wind up. But most importantly, when we die, our soul does detach from our vessel, from the body itself. Yeah? And the body is part of what we leave behind. But the body is also our interface with the material plane. This is somewhere where our astral form, our soul, connected onto the material realm and had a form. And there is an energetic exchange that occurs there, and an energetic process that is exothermic, meaning it gives out extra energy. And while we're alive, this is seen as the aura. Yeah? And that is what we are interacting with when we use our chi, when we do any kind of energy working, a lot of the spell work that we do, a lot of the ways I've taught you to charge sigils. It is the energy created by that body-soul interaction that we are using to charge that magic, because that energy exists between the veil. It is part of how we weave, is with that energy and the energy field that comes off of us. Okay, so we're going to get a bit more into that in a minute. I feel like there's some bits I haven't covered on what happens when we die. Okay, so let's see. We've covered what happens if you have a sudden death. We've covered what happens if you die and you're not dreaming. If you die and you are dreaming, what will happen is the dream that you were in will become more cohesive. It may take you a while to realize that this dream has become more real and more profound than when you were alive, than when you were awake, and your old will just fade away. And at that point, hopefully, if you have things set up, then you can then make it to your astral platform and prepare for the next life or whatever it is that you intend to do. Okay, so some other things that can happen when you die is it is possible to have outside intervention. I mentioned that already about if your ancestors come to you or if someone you've angered comes to you. But there are crossroads spirits that one can choose to petition for this purpose. There's lots of different ones. The literal Grim Reaper type spirits can actually come to you and guide you through to the other side and take you to whatever realm it is that you have agreed to be taken to by this crossroads keeper, or even taken and allowed yourself to just get a moment of clarity and decide what to do on the other side. You can also focus on the S1 sigil, which I've talked about in a lot of my videos, and that's actually what I recommend, is learning to focus on the S1 sigil, and at the moment of death, focusing on that sigil, going to the sigil, and that gives you a place where not only can no harm come to you, but you're also going to be able to get that clarity and understand where you are and what has happened before you make any decisions about what you want to do from there. And then if you have an astral platform or dream platform you've created, you can go there, prepare for your next life, or do whatever it is that you intend to do to avoid reincarnating or trying to reincarnating on a different material realm than this one. But those are different videos. We'll talk about all that in the surviving death video. This is not that video. Right now we're talking about how the hauntings occur. Okay, so let's see. Different deaths. We've talked about what happens if you die when you're dreaming, if you're not dreaming and asleep, sudden deaths, fading deaths. There's the unaliving. That is a particularly odd scenario. We're not going to talk about that actually, except for that it can come with some real complications. I don't recommend doing that. Let's see. Then there's accidental death, unexpected death. Like I said, it may take. Sometimes it can take you a moment with these sudden deaths to realize that you were dead. You could wind up in the undefined, like boom, you're in the undefined, unexpectedly, or you could be so focused on that part of the mental and astral realm that you were aware of and whatever it was you were doing, that is all that you experience. And so after you die and don't realize that you have done that you have stepped over into the other realm, and it might take you a while to realize that you were dead. And that can be where a lot of these wraiths come from. By wraith, I mean someone whose higher soul has merged with their aura or ka that we were talking about before. And the essay on surviving death is all about doing that intentionally. So there are ways to intentionally do that and actually, in a way, survive death and maintain a vessel on the material plane from your ka. It's not going to be the same as actually being alive, obviously. You're not going to have a physical body, like an actual body, but you do have a energetic material form when you create that kind of ghost. And all ghosts have that type of form. So, we've talked about what it is that we leave behind, that aura, that ka. So while we're alive and we have the soul-body interaction, that goes into that makes that exothermic energetic reaction that we call the aura. And then when we separate from that, it becomes a residual recording of what was there, almost an energetic clone, if you will. And left undisturbed, nothing happens to it. It just deteriorates along with the rest of the body. This is the thing that we take advantage of and use when we make ka or coal spirits, which we will be talking about later on this channel. But for our purposes, we're talking about the naturally occurring hauntings. So that's the ways that the aura gets reinflated and creates a ghost. And the most common way for this to happen is, well, like the cliche, unfinished business. Something that you were so focused on that you step into it like that, like the person that just steps in. Because they were so focused on what they were doing, they just keep doing it, and their aura stays right with them, and they inflate it and put new positive life force energy into that auric form, the ka. Or, as they're dying, they're worrying about the fact that they forgot to lock their door. So even after they've actually detached from the body, there's still a little bit of link to the aura, and they turn back and worry about that unlocked door. And that gives energy to that ka spirit, and it inflates it and creates the ghost. And it gets the anchor point of that door or the keys that were in its pocket. But it has to be fed in order to keep going. So people have to believe in it. It has to find some other way to feed off of emotions or energetic forms. There are some that feed off of residual energy. There's lots of different ways they feed. We'll get into that as well in other episodes. But that is one way that they occur, is by thinking back just at the moment of death. And we don't necessarily stay connected to that. That glance of awareness at it does not tie us to it. We can still leave, but that bit of perception, that energy that we put towards it, inflates that ka. And the longer we spend doing that before we attach, the more of a first charge it's going to get, and then it will stay anchored to anything that has a lot of its energy in it as well. Things that you've been around a lot, things that you put a lot of your emotion, work, and labor into, literal blood, sweat and tears, your spellcraft, your magical tools, all of these things will have a residual connection to you even after death. And so, the way the naturally occurring haunting occurs is by these urges back, these thoughts towards those things that are also connected to that aura, and creates the anchor points, and then they need to be charged. Unless it's like the nameless dead, which are just little bits of desires that all weave together. But we're going to spend an entire episode of this particular essay on the nameless dead. We're going to be talking quite a bit about those. It's an interesting phenomenon, but it's very useful in necromancy. It's a very common tool. Anyways, so we looking back, unfinished business, anything like that can add to this ghost. And then we detach from that and leave it behind. Or we don't. And that's where you get your most self-aware ghosts, the ones that are actually connected to the soul. But these ones that are the reinflated energetic clone of you, if you will, they do tend to have quite a bit of free will and even sometimes self-awareness. And there can be uses for these, even for you, because in your next life, if you can draw upon that, that is a great resource for past life recall, because that's stuff that didn't have to stay in cohesion with your mental aspect, which is the one part that we're always part of, and always focused, at least part of our awareness, on the mental plane, and then we go back and forth between the material and the astral as far as what we're really looking at, what we're really perceiving most of the time, unless we're attuned to that center the way that we are intended to be. But most of us aren't actually there. That's kind of the point of the whole astral evolution process, is to get us to that point, and then we keep evolving from there, because nothing ever ends. We just keep evolving forward into greater and more creative versions of the self. Okay, so let's see. I think we've covered all the ways that one can die. We've explained what it is that we leave behind and how it gets its charge. Other ways that it can get a charge is by other people thinking about you intently through objects that are connected to that aura or ka spirit, like holding your favorite t-shirt and wishing and thinking on you can create a bit of an energetic reaction. With this unfinished business, a lot of times something that will happen and we hear stories about this all the time, is people's phones ringing, someone calling just after death. And that's because they're focusing on that. You've already detached, but then you go to the aura and you push that out, the desire to contact that person. And the aura has that literal electricity in it. And it is enough sometimes to push forward and make a phone ring, make a phone call happen, or even sometimes just get to someone long enough to tell them something. And that's why we hear all these different ghost stories of someone appearing and saying something to someone and then disappearing, and they are actually died hundreds of miles away somewhere. Is because of that push, that last bit there of the energetic form of the ka being used in a very direct and intentional manner. But in order to do that, these types of apparitions, you need to realize that you are dead and be able to push into that ka or a spirit, keep it inflated rather than deflating it, and project that energy to do that one particular task. Anyways, I think we've pretty much covered what the ka spirit is and given a good explanation of what it is that happens when we die and how the process occurs. Um, we will have a future episode on what to do about death and surviving death and how to keep oneself's cohesion, but that will be later on in the series. I think that's going to do it for this episode. So, um, thank you for joining us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please take the opportunity to do so now. Until next time, bright blessings and an interesting fate. This has been Sorcerer Tao.